on Monday and Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. I recommend using headphones if you would like to hear the gentle mic brushing. Now, before we get started, I just want to say, if you would like to help grow this channel, you can do so by subscribing, hitting the bell, clicking on the new videos, and watching them for as long as you can. I understand you can't watch all the videos for the full time, but the more you watch, the more YouTube will recommend the videos. And of course, as always, please leave it a like and a comment. Thank you so much for all your help and support. So tonight we are headed on over to Minnesota. Shout out to all my friends in Minnesota. Now, this is a case that took place in 2012 in Little Falls, Minnesota, and it involves 3 people. There is Nicholas Brady and Haley Kiefer, who were cousins, teenage cousins. And there is Byron Smith, a 64-year-old retired man. They all resided in Little Falls, Minnesota. So let me give you a little background on each of them. Starting with Nicholas Brady, who was 17 at the time. Now, according to his family, quote, he was taken to church faithfully. He was in youth group for part of his growing up. He went to the Baptist Christian school. So we tried to funnel as much good into him as you can, right thinking and morals. The one area that was a downfall on our part, we did foster care for really difficult kids, and some of them were wonderful. Some were more difficult than others. We probably had 150 kids come through our home in 28 years, and Nick was in our home all the time, side by side with kids that had problems and were hurting, and he frequently saw kids steal, end quote. Okay, so that's about all I could get on his background. Then we have his cousin, Haley Kiefer. She was 18. She was said to be a person who always made others smile. She was a talented member of the school swim team, and other teammates looked up to her. She had a history of addiction, and she had attended a substance abuse program in the past. But it was found that on the date that this case takes place, she was clearly still using or had started using again, because marijuana and a high level of cough syrup chemicals were found in her system. Okay. And the third person that is involved is Byron Smith. He was 64. He was born on June 11th, 1948. He was a retired security engineering officer had only actually reported one case to the police, and that was on October 27th, 2012. When the police came to respond to that incident, they saw that the intruder had left a shoe print on the panel of the basement door when they kicked it in. They were not able to determine who the burglar or burglars were, but they found evidence of another break-in in his detached garage that he wasn't even aware of. So at least 2 of the break-ins at his house are considered to be verified. Among the items that were stolen from him were a shotgun, a rifle, $4,000 in cash, his father's POW watch, coins from a collection, and a chainsaw. Now, Byron Smith was having a lot of trouble sleeping due to all these break-ins. And it wasn't just his house, apparently. A lot of homes in the neighborhood were getting burglarized. So, as I said, he couldn't sleep. He started wearing a holster with a loaded gun while he was inside his house. He installed an intricate security system at his house with cameras to see all the different angles, and he was generally pretty stressed out. Now, on Thanksgiving morning, it was November 22nd, 2012, and it was around 10:30 a.m., and Byron Smith was standing outside talking to his neighbor, and a car drove by, and as he looked into the car, he believed that the people in the car were the ones who had burglarized his home. So, after about an hour of chit-chat with the neighbor, he excused himself. He got his car out of his garage and he drove it about 2 blocks down the street and parked it, and then returned to his house. He went in through the back door, and he went down into the basement where he had a big armchair set up. It was in between 2 bookcases, and it was set up behind the basement stairs so that if you were coming down the stairs you would not see him, but he could see you. He unscrewed the light bulb so that the overhead light in the basement would not come on. And he turned on an audio recorder, like a tape recorder, and he sat down with a book and some water and some snacks. He had his gun in his holster and another one on the floor near the chair. And he waited. So now you can imagine what he's thinking. He saw this car, he's thinking, those people drove by, they're planning on coming back and breaking in. Well, I'm gonna be ready for them. You would say that he moved his car probably so that they would think nobody's home, and that would be a good time to break in. That's just what it sounds like, okay? He would later say that he was cleaning out his garage and he moved his car for that reason. So he was sitting down there since about noon, and at 12:33 waited in silence for 12 minutes until Nicholas Brady began to come down the basement stairs. Once he saw the first glimpse of Brady, he shot at him 2 times while he was on the stairs. And then when the kid fell down to the bottom, Smith shot him again in the head. Then Smith made taunting remarks to Brady's body. He wrapped him up in a tarp and dragged him into another room. Then he went upstairs for a little bit, and about 10 or 15 minutes later, he ran back to the basement. He reloaded his weapon and sat back down in the chair. A few minutes later, Haley Kiefer entered the home and was calling out her cousin's name, and she headed down the basement stairs, at which point Smith shot her. She fell down the stairs, and you can hear Smith say on his recording, quote, "Oh, sorry about that." And then you hear her say, "Oh my God," very quickly. And then Smith shoots her again multiple times in the torso as she screams, "Oh my God." And then he shot her in her left eye. He repeatedly called her derogatory names, and then he dragged her into the other room and tossed her on top of Nick's dead body. She was still alive. So he shot her one final time under the chin, killing her. Now, after all of this, he did not call the police. He stayed there in the house with the bodies until the next day, when he went outside and saw his neighbor, and he asked his neighbor to first call him a lawyer, and then he told the neighbor to call the sheriff because he had solved the burglary problem in the area. So the police came over, and he said that the reason he didn't call them yesterday was because it was Thanksgiving and he didn't want to ruin the Thanksgiving of the policemen. So anyway, they came over and they saw the bodies, they saw the crime scene, and he was arrested. They took him down to the sheriff's office for questioning, and he discussed the burglaries that led up to the Thanksgiving Day burglary and shooting. He said that he had, quote, felt very threatened, end quote, over the past month. And when he heard people coming down the stairs, he believed that they were the people who had stolen his guns. And he said, quote, "I figured they're willing to use guns if they steal guns. And I decided that I've got a choice of either shooting or being shot at," end quote. So the investigators looked into the background of these teenagers, and it was found that Nick Brady's sister claimed that he stole drugs from her home on August 28th of that year, and that case was still under investigation at this point. clean finishing shot, end quote, into Haley Kiefer's head. Legal analysts who looked into the case said that the initial shootings, meaning the ones on the staircase, would most likely have been justified under Minnesota law, but the shots after that were not justified because the threat was gone. With both of these teens, they couldn't have done anything to him when they were laying on the floor in the basement. They were both wounded, and the extra shots were not warranted. Sheriff Wetzel said, quote, "The law doesn't permit you to execute somebody once a threat is gone," end quote. Investigators listened to the 6 hours of audio tape that Smith had made of himself. And prior to the break-in, before they ever even got to the house, before the teens ever even started looking at the house, you can hear him saying, quote, "in your left eye," end quote. Now remember, he shot one of them in the left eye. And he said, quote, "I realize I don't have an appointment, but I would like to see one of the lawyers here," end quote. So it seems like he was practicing what he was going to say later. After the shootings, you can hear him saying to himself, quote, "I am not a bleeding heart liberal. I felt like I was cleaning up a mess, not like spilled food, not like vomit, not even like diarrhea, the worst mess possible, and I was struck with it in some tiny little respect. I was doing my civic duty. If the law enforcement system couldn't handle it, I had to do it. I had to do it. The law system couldn't handle her, and it fell into my lap, and she dropped her problem in my lap, and she threw her own problem in my face, and I had to clean it up. And if I gather enough evidence, they might be prosecuted. If they're prosecuted, it might go to court. If it goes to court, they might be found guilty. If they're found guilty, they might spend 6 months, 2 years in jail. And then they're out, and they need money worse than ever, and they're filled with revenge. I cannot live a life like that. I cannot have that chewing on me for the rest of my life. I cannot. I refuse to live with that level of fear in my life. I refuse to live with that level of fear in my life," end quote. So, his recorded statements, plus the evidence indicating that he planned the shootings, along with the excessive number of shots fired, led to him being charged with 2 counts of second-degree murder. But in April of the following year, 2013, he was indicted on 2 counts of first-degree murder. Bail was set at $50,000, which he posted. Hamline Law Professor Emeritus Joseph Daly stated, quote, "In some states, somebody breaks into your home and you're allowed to shoot them dead, period." He pointed out that some states like Florida have a, quote, "stand your ground law," but Minnesota has what's known as a reasonable person doctrine. Quote, "If a reasonable person would see it as you are in fear of great bodily harm or death, that's our statute. It comes down to what would a reasonable person see in this situation for Mr. Smith," end quote. On April 21st, 2014, the trial began, and 8 days later he was found guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder with premeditation and on 2 counts of second-degree murder after 3 hours of jury deliberation. killings and the audio recording of Mr. Smith's interview immediately after his arrest pretty much convinced me that we were dealing with a deranged individual. End quote. Several unsuccessful appeals have been filed, and he is currently incarcerated at Oak Park Heights Prison. What are your thoughts? I will tell you some of mine. First of all, rest in peace to Haley Kiefer and Nicholas Brady. And my heart goes out to their families. Now, there's a lot of controversial topics that could be discussed here, so I am going to be extremely careful. Otherwise, people will get mad at me, and I don't want that. Let's talk about whether or not it was Byron Smith's right to kill the burglars. So, we heard what the laws are in Minnesota, and they're not the same as the laws in Florida. In Florida, I guess as soon as somebody breaks into your house, you have the right to kill them. If I'm wrong about that, let me know. Okay, that's just my understanding. But in Minnesota, there are certain stipulations to that. You can only do what is reasonably necessary to eliminate the threat to your life. And clearly, we don't have to delve too much into it to see that he did more than he needed to, and he even admitted that he did shoot them more than he needed to. So that kind of answers the question whether or not he had the right to kill them, and it sounds like legally he didn't. And regardless of the past of these teens, like regardless of how many crimes they had already committed or how many crimes they would potentially commit in the future, none of that matters when it comes to the law. And a lot of the details made things much worse for him than it needed to be, because if you didn't hear all the audio tape, then you would have just said it's a second-degree murder charge, not premeditated. Just he overdid it in protecting his safety, But once you hear all the audio and the video and you get the whole story, you know that it's almost like he planned it. And I understand that he was traumatized by the previous break-ins and all, but that's not enough to get him out of it. He had a lot of chances to